Katie, Wendy, thank you both so much for setting everything up today. I'm really honored to be here as part of a terrific panel and delighted to see so many excellent founders here joining us. I'm going to take a moment to introduce myself, and then I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves as well. I'm Jody Collier, the Executive Director of Launchpad Venture Group. I'm joined by Marjorie Radlow-Zandy. Marjorie is an active angel in the community as a member of Launchpad, as well as Branch Ventures. She's a VMN mentor and a terrific board member for a number of startups. We're also joined by David Beisel. He is the co-founder and partner at NextView Ventures, so representing the VC end of things, as well as Hyukjen Suh, who is here as well as a VC. He is leading Sky River Ventures, and he is also a VMN mentor. So we have a terrific panel. I'm going to ask each of them to share a little bit about themselves, but you are really fortunate to have such wonderful people here joining us from a number of different sectors. Marjorie, if you would start, please.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Jody. I graduated from Northeastern with an MBA, so I'm an alumni of Northeastern, and then I went off to Silicon Valley and did a lot of go-to-market work with a number of startups. I then joined a firm in Boston and grew the firm up to, I was doing business in one country to doing business in 100 countries to an exit. And I used angel funds in order to do that. I sold it to Waters Corporation. We did get 10 offers on it. And then I became an angel investor, mentor, and consultant to early stage businesses. I work with several VMN businesses that have gone through the VMN program. One is Food Space, another is QSM, another one is UFO Milk and Beba. They're all from Northeastern. They're doing fabulous. Thank you for having me here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Marjorie. David, good afternoon.
Hi. I'm David Beisel. I'm an entrepreneur turned VC. NextView Ventures, we are a seed stage venture capital firm. We have offices here in Boston as well as in New York, but we invest throughout the country. We're investing out of our fourth fund, which is a $100 million fund, which we raised last year. And we'll invest across the broad range of seeds. So as little as a couple $100K into a startup that's two people, a dog, and a PowerPoint plan, up to invest up to about $2 million into kind of larger seed rounds before startups are ready to raise their Series A financing.
Perfect. David, thank you. Hyukjen.
Hi, my name is Hyukjen Suh, general partner at Sky River Ventures, which is a deep tech and digital health focused fund. My background, I've always been kind of a techie, did engineering and worked at Intel for a number of years, and also at a biotech company and another startup company in the microtechnology space, and worked at in the banking world, and I worked at Sky River Venture, Samsung Ventures, which is the corporate venture arm of Samsung, and led that office in Boston for the last 7 or so years, and now in the process of raising Sky River Ventures. And I'm also a VMN. Sorry, I'm also a VMN mentor and help with the ICOR program here at Northeastern.
Awesome, awesome. All right, I'm just going to share a tiny bit about myself, just to let you know who I am. I'm the executive director of Launchpad Venture Group, which is a network of angels based here in the Boston area. We invest only in New England area startups, and we are looking at that first price round after friends and family, which we'll talk about a little bit here. We put about $8 to $10 million to work each year, primarily in tech and this. Marjorie's, as I mentioned, one of our angels, and we're always forward to meeting terrific teams from Northeastern. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes here just getting rolling. 5:30 is when we want to be heading into our breakout room. So we've got quite a bit of time. We've got some great questions that came from the RSVP list, as well as some that we just think would be really helpful. So to kind of set the table, I might ask David to kick us off and talk a little bit about the difference between VCs and angels, and why one of these founders might want to consider going to one group rather than another.
Yeah, so I mean, angels are individuals who are, writing checks from their own personal balance sheets, whereas venture capital firms, are professional investors, usually a full-time role, where they've investing their own personal capital as well as capital which they've raised from third-party investors. And I think one of the additional differences that's important to highlight is that each angel investor is making a decision for each investment they make kind of in and of themselves, whereas an institutional investor is really building a fund of a portfolio of a number of investments. And so given the context and the background of why they're investing and what their motivations are, sometimes they can behave very differently, and the kinds of companies that they look at are different, just based on the fact of what the kind of the back setting is of why they're making these investments.
Sure. Okay, great. That's helpful. Marjorie, from the angel perspective, do you want to add anything to what David shared?
Sure. From the angel side, I think I agree with a lot of his comments. On the angel side, there's also a financial component to the total addressable market, whereas VCs tend to have a larger total addressable market. Angels look at a total addressable market of 100 million or more, whereas VCs, it's usually quite a bit higher than that. And angels also have, in terms of the investment dollars, they invest, depends, it may be individual checks, but the total investment can get over $1 million per group, and often it's syndicated. But there is just like with VCs, there's a qualifying process in terms of angels.
Excellent, excellent. And we'll use that as a basis for a lot of what we're going to talk about here. Hyuk-Jen, do you want to add anything? You've come from more of the sort of the venture within a large company, a corporate venture group. Would you just elaborate a little bit so people understand the distinction there, please?
Sure. In the corporate venture side, it's actually quite complex because different corporate venture groups act and behave and report differently to different organizations. But at a high level, we typically invest for strategic reasons, mostly, more than financial reasons. And so the incentives are different and the purpose of the investments are different. Oftentimes, companies who reach out to corporate venture groups, they reach out because they want some sort of a partnership or a vendor relationship or something like that. On the corporate side, they're interested in maybe accessing that technology to maybe embed into their products. And they typically tend to be a little bit later stage than traditional angel or traditional VCs. And so we typically end up coming in, I would say Series B is typically when they mostly come in. Although when I was at Samsung Ventures, we were stage agnostic, and I've done deals from seed stage to Series F. So it's pretty broad.
Absolutely, great. That's excellent. All right, so the point of this get together, as Katie mentioned, is thinking about building your investor network, how to build that list of people that you want to talk to. So I'm going to ask the panelists to talk about how CEOs find you and some of the sort of most effective ways that happens. And I'll go to each of you and maybe think about great things that CEOs have done that make you want to take a meeting, and then we can talk about things that maybe you've seen that didn't really work, that could be pitfalls that folks could avoid. Hyuk-Jen, if you don't mind, I'll start off with you on that question.
In terms of meeting corporate venture VCs, I think in general, all of us, including angels, want to meet a lot of people, right? We're in the business of meeting people. And I think typically startup CEOs, are a little bit nervous about reaching out to investors, but in reality, we do want to meet everybody. And so I would recommend, feel free to reach out. And oftentimes getting a soft intro is nice. It's not mandatory, but having a soft intro to meet people, I think would be a great way to get somewhat vetted, if you want to call it.
Sure, that makes really good sense. And David, if you want to elaborate on that, and maybe also add in sort of when the best time is for someone to reach out to you as a VC.
Yeah, I think an intro is helpful. I don't think that entrepreneurs have to spend too many calories looking for the warmest intro. I think an introduction of some kind just kind of puts you above the noise. That's when people always worry about, oh, how do I get a warm intro? I think you just need to get someone who knows the other person, who can kind of just get it so it goes to the top of their inbox, and then you kind of stand on your own from there. We at NextView look and read. We get a lot of cold inbound emails. We read every single one of them. But then I think the onus on you on that email is you really have to personalize that email and make it kind of stand out. We have, within the last 3 years, I think we've invested in one company that was a cold email to me. And they communicated in that email why they're reaching out to NextView, why they're reaching out to me specifically with respect to the portfolio companies which I've invested in previously, and why it fit into our firm's overall thesis. But we probably do 10 deals a year, and so that's 1 out of 30 over the last 3 years were cold emails.
Got it. And I just wanted to underscore what you said, which was the idea that the email that was sent to you, while it was a cold email, it was really clearly outlined as far as what exactly the firm could bring to you and why you. So I think that's something just really key to keep in mind. Yeah. Marjorie, how do people find angels and angel groups?
Okay. As far as angels, the best way is through the Angel Capital Association. They have a listing, and I'm going to put it in the chat right now so everyone can see it. And what you want to do is you want to look at the groups and look at the portfolio companies that they have. See if your company kind of fits into that. You'll see if, let's say, you have a clean tech, an ed tech, or life science or med device company or SaaS company. That's perfect for Launchpad, but it's not perfect if you live in California, because Launchpad looks for companies only in the Northeast. In terms of the branch venture group, which I'm part of, it looks for food and food tech. So, that is, you would specifically target that if you have a food company, and only if you happen to be in Germany and you have a food company, that's not going to be okay for branch. It's only companies in the US and Canada, but it's in the food and food tech space. But be targeted and do your research.
A couple other thoughts. I think that's a helpful way to find angel groups. I think finding individual angels through AngelList is a really interesting way to find actual individuals. If you go there, log in, you can sort by geography, but then I think you can also sort by sector and other categories as well. Because I think at the end of the day, whether you're an individual angel or you're angel part of an angel group, professional investor, all investors make decisions with, their heart as well as their head, right? And so you want to find things that are common to what your startup is doing and the individual angel or the person's background.
No, that's true. And I think through networks like VMN for Northeastern is just fabulous with that in terms of the connection through the program, which eventually I'm an invest mentor for Northeastern. So I work with companies to help prepare them to have the right type of pitch deck and approach for funding. And some may be relevant for Launchpad, some may not be, or even branch. But I think what Northeastern's doing in terms of preparing is really, really good and helpful. And I would also say that just LinkedIn, I've gotten a number of very interesting inquiries through LinkedIn. Don't hesitate to do that as far as an intro.
I can just add one thing. If you reach out to an angel or VC, whoever it might be, or corporate venture, and they don't respond, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not interested per se. That might be true, but oftentimes we have so many inbound emails that we sometimes miss it. Right. And so don't be annoying, but, reach out to them again, just say, hey, just putting this at the top of your inbox to see if you're interested. And they'll get back to you. Right. And so don't take that first email non-response as a rejection.
I appreciate your saying that, because I know that some founders struggle with that, fine line between, am I being incredibly annoying or am I being tenacious? And it's important to sort of know when to push and when to, sort of take a little bit of a step back. But what I'm hearing is that, reaching out a couple of times is not a bad thing.
Correct. And I would
All
say,
right, so let's say, yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, if you reach out, 2 times, maybe even 3 times, I think it's fine. And in fact, at the final email, just ask them like, did you give up on this idea or just not of interest to you? And it's a little bit of psychology, but if you actually phrase it in a negative tone, like, did you forget or did you decide not to do this? VCs have a little bit of an attitude, like, ego, like, no, of course I'm going to look at it. We should just dare me not to look at it. And we might get a little bit of a better response. I don't know. So.
That's good. I appreciate these practical ideas for the folks on the call here today. All right, so let's say somebody has, piqued your interest and you have said, sure, you know what, I want to take a deeper look at this and I'll have a meeting with you. Tell me a little bit about what that first meeting looks like, what you expect to see when you've taken a meeting with the founder. David, we'll start with you.
Well, I think the first thing, the purpose of the first meeting is not to get a check. The purpose of the first meeting is to get a second meeting. I think it's whether it's an angel group or a venture capital firm, there is a process, right? And so I think part of that first meeting is conveying, the company and why the firm should be excited about it. But then part of it's also asking the right questions about, learning what the process is, as opposed to an individual angel can, pick up and write the check over there. And then, a group or a firm has an organization and there's a process. And so you want to figure out and basically learn what that process is.
I love that nugget that your first meeting is just to get to the next meeting. And,
Yep.
I often tell entrepreneurs, you just want to keep that conversation going. You want to make sure that there's engagement there. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Marjorie, thoughts on that? Sort of what would you ideally hope for in a first meeting that you take with a founder?
What I would hope for, granted, there's usually a description of their company and so shown that it's a target area. I would say that the founder should be prepared with some type of deck. And one deck that I would recommend is something that the head of Launchpad Group, and I'll put that also in the chat, Pitch Deck Fundamentals. He's also a columnist at Inc. magazine, as well as chair of the Angel Capital Association. But that's what I would do. I definitely would prepare a deck. And often the first meeting, as Jody said, does not, and also David mentioned this also, it's not going to be writing a check, but it also may be just to inform about what one is working on. There's a group, actually, it's out of Yale, and a woman just keeps updating me. She won a pitch competition. She says, no, I'm not ready for funding, but she has a diagnostic for sickle cell disease, and she just wants to keep me informed of the process. I think that's nice. And as Jody says, just keep the conversation going.
We have, we have in NextView, we try to put out a lot of content for entrepreneurs. And so we have a map for what to expect after a VC meeting, which I just put in the chat. And then
Perfect.
We also have a pitch deck template that you can literally just download and then populate in, things that are relevant and salient for your company.
Awesome. These are great tools. All right, so here's a question. A lot of entrepreneurs get involved with incubators and accelerators, some of them even right through Northeastern. When you guys are looking at companies to consider, what do you think about people being involved in organizations like that? Hyuk-Jen, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, I don't think all incubators are created equal. I think there are some that are, exceptional and others that are not as exceptional. And so picking the right incubator, I think, helps and makes sense. And I think if you have an opportunity to join one of these, well-run incubators, I would recommend doing that. It really does expose you to a lot of other investors and also gives you a good guideline as to how you should approach a problem or an industry. And so I would personally say, tackling one would be good, but I wouldn't get addicted to incubators is what I would say.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah, that can-
tendency sometimes for some companies to do 2 or 3, and I think there's diminishing returns, and then it starts to send the negative signal to potential investors for later.
I would also add that, Food Space, which is actually a Launchpad portfolio company, which came out of Northeastern, just won a pitch deck competition at Salesforce he's Black and Black entrepreneurs. And through that, he was able to get a lot of connections in terms of sales for his company. A lot of the Salesforce customers are also going to be customers of Food Space. So in addition to all the knowledge that you can get from them, you can also get connections to potential customers and investors.
And some incubators actually are very, very targeted. We have general ones like, Y Combinator or Mass Challenge, but there are other ones that are very, very specific. For instance, there's an incubator called Silicon Catalyst, which is specifically focused on semiconductor startups, to another incubator accelerator called Illuminate, that's specifically focused on photonics and optics. And so getting these types of, really focused incubators may also help to find people who are looking for that specific kind of technology.
Thank you. I think that speaks to one of the questions that came up in the chat too, about finding people with particular backgrounds or particular investment theses that are, aligned with what an entrepreneur is working on. It is important to do your homework there. All right, so I just wanted to just take this a little bit further. They've had a good meeting with you. What should they expect after that? What are sort of some of the next steps that you would typically see with somebody you've taken a look at their initial pitch deck using maybe some of the tools that David and Marjorie shared? What are some of the sort of logical next steps for one of these companies? Marjorie, do you want to start?
Sure. So after I vet a different early stage company that comes to me through, sometimes it's one discussion or several discussions, I actually bring it to one of the executive committee. So be it whether it's at Branch or Launchpad. In that case, Jody, you're part of that. I usually send it over to you and for you to take a look at it. You may want to talk to some other members about it to see if it's a fit for Launchpad. I said, I try to make it pretty targeted. I say about 75% of the time for both Branch and Launchpad, there's usually an acceptance to come into a meeting. For Launchpad, there's an early stage forum. We run it 10 times a year. And often early stage companies get in there where they're able to show, talk about their company, and both get potential capital, but more importantly, human capital to really help them in terms of their venture. And if they are, often some of those companies, but a smaller percent of those make it to the main forum. But it's really a good launching pad, pun on words, to actually get accelerated, both in terms of human and investment capital.
David, do you have some, thank you. Do you have some additional thoughts on that, David?
Yeah, I mean, with the venture firm, after the first meeting, assuming that they want to proceed, there's really a series of 2 things that happen kind of in parallel. The first one is you end up likely getting introduced to another partner and then maybe another partner. And basically what's happening is you're getting socialized around the firm. And then the person that you got to originally is hearing feedback from other team members. Mm-hmm. So that's one set of things that goes on. And then the second is some kind of diligence process. So, the person that's going to end up potentially leading the round is doing their homework, whether it's desk work on their own end, or they're potentially maybe calling customers or calling other people within the industry what they want to learn more about to educate themselves and making about an informed decision. And both of those kind of end up culminating usually in what's kind of the final partner pitch, where the entrepreneur goes in front of the entire kind of investment team of a firm. We at NextView have a small partnership. There's 4 GPs and one junior investment professional. But at some firms, I mean, I was at a previous firm where they're literally, you'd go into a room with dozens of people and have to pitch this huge crowd. And it's after that that that's when the real decision is made, and there's a deeper discussion talking about all the kind of diligence process that's gone through, as well as people that have already met the company before kind of weigh in as well.
Very good. That's super helpful. Probably sort of intimidating sometimes to go, especially if you're up at like, a big group of 24 people at a VC firm, or sometimes you're at a group of, I know at Launchpad, it can sometimes be 50, 60 people, investors in a room. So things that people should think about when they're at that pitch level: who should be presenting? What should the focus be? Hyuk-Jin, do you want to take that one to start?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times I see startup companies come because it's a big deal to meet with the VC in that kind of the final stage, or a corporate VC or whatever it might be. They end up coming with an advisor and the whole team. But oftentimes some people have asked if an advisor should pitch, and I would say the answer is probably no, that we all want to see the CEO of the company do the pitch and maybe be supported by the CEO or CTO, at the pitch event. But we would expect the CEO to be able to run through the whole deck, by himself. One thing I'd like to just point out, on the corporate venture side, which is a little bit different, I think, than on the angel and traditional institutional VC side, is that the process is much more elongated. Right? It does take a much longer time, and what corporate VCs look for is quite different. When you go to do that pitch, my recommendation actually is to have at least one slide, whether it's a case study or what you want to do, that talks about the strategic angle for why you want to work with a Samsung versus an Apple or LG, whoever it might be. But having that is important to get their heads around, okay, why is this company approaching us? That corporate venture ultimately in that second meeting has to take that information and relay it back perhaps to the business unit or to the headquarters, and be able to explain and be the internal champion for you, right? And so having that person really understand and explain why is it that we have to use or invest in this company will be key. A lot of times that I see happen with a lot of startup companies, they come and approach Samsung, for instance, and say, hey, if you help us by preloading this app or whatever might be on the phone, we will help you sell more phones. And that's the strategic angle. And that is actually the exact wrong thing to say. And the reason why, for instance, is you can download any app on any phone. It does not separate Samsung phone from an LG phone or a Huawei phone or Apple phone, right? And so that is not a strategic rationale. It does not help to differentiate our products and services from our peers or competitors. And so a different approach has to happen. Oftentimes that comes down to the IP. What is unique about your IP? Because even if you could sell more phones to Samsung, how many more phones could you guarantee that you could sell? 100,000, a million? Even if it's a million or 10 million, it's still, a drop in the bucket for a company the size of Samsung or Google, whoever it might be that you're working with. And so having a really good strategic rationale for ways that they would be differentiated by partnering with you is really important. And once they have that, then they go through the business unit. Then they go through the process of evaluating your technology, and then later on coming together with a commercial agreement or whatever it might be, and then concurrently doing the investment. So the process is elongated for that reason. There's a commercial contract and a investment contract that you have to do typically concurrently.
That's really helpful. And another thing I heard you talk about in there is making sure that there's a champion that is really shepherding the deal along internally. And I think that's something that's really important, and part of what we want to make sure that the folks who are listening to this panel are hearing is sort of how to establish that relationship and keep it going. It's just such an important thing to find somebody who's a firm believer, in order to, in my experience at least, in order to keep the conversations going. I don't know, Marjorie, David, if you had any other observations on that.
It's a little pithy to say, but fundraising is about the search for believers, not convincing the skeptics, right? And so, if it seems like someone's taking a bunch of meetings, but you just can get a sense they just don't really believe, like you're better off trying to use those calories and looking for someone else who really does believe, and they just have to kind of they already believe with their heart. They just have to convince their head to go through the diligence process, and then become a champion for whether it's within their angel organization or within their venture firm or within their corporation.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it's also easier for the entrepreneur if he or she has a person that they can ask questions of. For example, UFO Milk, which is actually Branch Venture Group, is probably going to have a presentation out of Northeastern with Branch Venture Group. They'll ping me and say, what's going on? It's and to have someone that you feel comfortable with saying, you know what? Branch Venture Group is still very, very interested in that. We just have we have other companies slotted in ahead of you. It makes it much more comfortable throughout the process. And I just want to also mention that that there is, even with angel groups, there's a process, especially if you're looking for anywhere from $500,000 to over $1 million. There's the presentation phase, then there's and then what happens, this is for companies that go to the Launchpad main forum, but the same thing would be true for a Branch Venture Group, is that you'd go into the main forum. If there was a lot of thumbs up in the group, then we go to a deep dive where we ask a lot of questions of the entrepreneur and their team. And if that is successful, then it goes into a diligence process. But that, in terms of the time frame for all of that, it could last 4 months, potentially 5 months. Sometimes it could be done as quick as 3 months, but not usually, just to give everyone on the call a heads up.
I will say our process is a lot faster
Yeah,
than
that's really helpful. And Jen, you were talking about an elongated timeline. Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I was going to say yours is you probably, how would you sort of quantify it, David?
I would say we're days to no, weeks to yes in terms of timeline.
Very good. And Jen, you would say you're a little bit more elongated.
Yeah, I mean, on the corporate venture side, I would say the quickest I think Samsung Ventures ever done a deal was 1 month, right? But that's very, very rare. I think in corporate venture side, you would expect to it'll take at least 3 months to maybe 9 months or maybe even longer. And it's not because the corporate venture side guys don't want to move quicker. There could be a bottleneck on the corporate side, but there could be a bottleneck on the startup side. What I mean by that is if you have to meet certain specifications that a corporate wants, right? Do some sort of a clinical trial or do meet the specific spec in an engineering level regarding a computer chip or whatever it might be, that it will take you time to get to that level. So when you have that second meeting or third meeting, whatever it might be, and say, okay, you're able to create a computer vision AI technology to recognize a human being at X distance, well, we want it at 2X the distance. Now you have to spend a lot of time developing that before you approach them for them to even consider that commercial agreement. So it's not necessarily the corporate VC that's holding it up. It could be both. But to get through the corporate VC, because of these things, it will take quite a bit of time. But I would say on average, between 3 to 9 months is what you should expect. And for that reason, I would say don't approach a corporate VC when you're actually trying to raise money. You got to meet them way ahead in advance to build up that relationship. I think with all, whether it's angel or VC, just approaching them when you're not actually raising money to get feedback and find out how they're thinking will better prepare you, and then continue to give them update, as Marjorie mentioned about the Yale startup. I would do the same thing, especially with the corporate side.
Yeah, I think that seems like a really important theme to remember, is that whether these things are really fast or really slow, starting early and before you really need the funds is what matters. I love, David, how you said your days to know, and we try to give quick, clear no's with also a decent amount of constructive feedback that hopefully the entrepreneurs can use as they're continuing to develop and grow. I don't know if any of you guys could maybe speak a little bit to the entrepreneurs is like, oh my gosh, how should I handle the rejection, getting the no's?
I could take that. I don't know if anyone else wants to, but
Sure.
So how do you take a rejection? You know, I don't think a no is always a definitive no, right? And they may say no because your business model is not quite there or your technology is not quite there. And so, you know, come back to us when you have that ready. There are times when you say this is just outside the scope of our investment focus. And so that is clearly a no, right? But for the most part, I think, you know, if we say we're just not interested, and you dig a little bit deeper, you know, and ask, you know, what's causing the hesitation for you to consider investment in our company, and they'll tell you. And if it's something that is addressable, you can go and approach them again, you know, months or whatever it is it takes for you to address that. I think it's fine, but it takes a lot of no's to get to a yes. I mean, typically VCs look at thousands of companies per year. I mean, David mentioned he invests in, you know, what, 10 companies, you know, a handful of companies in a year, but I'm sure he sees hundreds, if not thousands of companies per year. You know, at Samsung Ventures, we probably saw the whole Samsung organization, probably 20,000 companies a year, right? And we probably invest, I don't know how many companies we invested in, but we were very active. I mean, at Samsung Ventures, we invested probably here just in the United States, a deal every 10 days, roughly. Globally, if you add all of up, probably every 2-3 days we're doing investments. So very, very active, one of the most active corporate venture in the world. But to get to that point, it was a long cycle, right? To get through it and get through that pipeline. And those that didn't, they need to go back, do some more homework, and come back and approach us. So I don't think it's a definitive no unless they clearly tell you this is not within the realm of what we're doing.
I think there's a difference between, I would call, a hard pass and a soft pass, right? So I mean, like a hard pass is you have one meeting and it's just like, it's not going to be a fit, and likely it's never going to be a fit. If we do more than one meeting, then it's most likely a soft pass. It means like there's something there that excited us. And so we took a couple meetings. And so that's, to your point before, that's when it's like, but ask for feedback and see if that can be addressed. But on the flip side, I think there are some cases where it's not a fit, and entrepreneurs, you know, really press, you know, what's feedback, and you know, if it just wasn't a fit after one meeting, it's hard. It's sometimes it's hard to be constructive, you know, other than kind of general, you know, go-to-market issues or something like that.
Sure.
Yeah. And I would say also for both Launchpad and Branch, it's a lot of times just isn't a fit. But with that said, there's a lot of companies that we have on our watch list that we may follow up with them over a year, sometimes a year and a half time, until they're ready to come back again. And often, it's really important to give the entrepreneur feedback, because often an entrepreneur will just say, you know what? I took in their feedback, and maybe this really isn't going to be a product or service that's going to have traction, or in the food side or beverage side, it just, the formulation is not to everyone's taste. So they go and they reformulate their company, and they come with another venture that is a fit. So don't give up. It's usually not a hard no, but really what's really valuable is the feedback, and don't hesitate to hear it.
I can't tell you how many times I've had Samsung say no to a company, and then 6 months down the line, they're pounding on my door asking me for a reintroduction to that company. It happens all the time, right? And sometimes the feedback we get from, you know, the business units, and what they tell you, it could be quite different from what they tell us, because they know us and they're giving us the real inside scoop. And so again, having that inside champion who can really kind of, you know, decipher the tea leaves, right, is really important. I mean, for the venture fund, for what I'm doing at Sky River Ventures, we try to be that trusted partner between the corporates and the startup company, and to understand what is it they really want. Sometimes what the corporates say, they don't quite tell you, because maybe internal conflicts, there may be a cultural difference, right? They don't feel comfortable saying no, because they know that the business units oftentimes change their minds. And so it's hard for them to give you that no. And having that kind of understanding is important. So once again, having a corporate venture who understands that and can give you more of an inside scoop, I think will be key.
I would add though, the cynic in me says it's in our self-serving interest to say no's or really soft no's when in many cases they're really not. We don't want to especially venture capitalists don't want to say no to an opportunity. You always want to keep that option. And so even though the no was probably mostly a no, you might be better off again searching for believers as opposed to trying to keep updating the same investors over and over again until they finally relent.
One of the reasons in my observations that we sometimes say no is because we don't feel like there's a full management team already built out. And sometimes, for example, we'll have a technical founder, but not a business, person already on the team. What do you guys think about that? Should these folks that are listening here, should they build out their full management team before they come and try to raise capital? How important is that?
I can start with that. I do think there needs to be both a technical and a commercial founder working together. But the challenges are that sometimes the technical founder doesn't have the funds yet to hire that commercial person. So in that case, I think an alternative could be a very, very good business advisor, someone who's on the advisory board that can help temporarily. But if the founder basically said, yep, I know that we need this commercial person and this is in our plans as soon as we get funding, but have someone with some business savvy on the team in some aspect.
It can be a little bit of a chicken and an egg problem, right? Of that they need to raise the financing in order to attract the right people onto the team. David, Hyuk-Jin, do you have any thoughts on team there?
I would say, we've over the last decade invested in 130 something companies. I think I can probably count on my hand the number that were solo founders.
Yeah.
It's teams. We talk about team. And we can talk about our decision-making process in one later, but our decision-making process is team, market, then product. And so team is first. And but the team doesn't need to be fully baked out, but it has to have, I would say, the core components. You do need a business person, and then you need a builder, right? Someone who's, and whether that's a technical person, if it's a technical product, or I have invested in a number of companies which aren't differentiated by technology, but are differentiated by market approach. And in those cases, you still need someone who's a builder.
Yep.
I would say, one litmus test to see whether or not your company is going to succeed is to see if you can hire someone without the money, right? If you can't convince someone to believe in your product, to join your product, then how do you expect to invest, to have a VC invest in you, right? If you can't build your own team. And so being able to create, at least bring on one business partner, I think is a nice test of your ability to build a business, right? And so I would highly recommend having that. Having said that, what I often also see, which I think is a mistake, is a lot of the technical founders don't put a lot of weight or importance on the business side, and so they dismiss a lot of that, and they say, I'm just going to do this on my own, and they don't do a proper equity share with the business person, whatever it might be. But I feel that even though at Skyward Ventures, Samsung, and all of that, we are very tech focused, that having a solid business person is really important, and that's the person that's going to help really create the company, not just the technology itself.
Absolutely. A question about sort of the VC landscape. David, I'll send this one over to you. Maybe just sharing a little bit about how folks would know if it's the right time in your cycle to reach out to a VC.
So venture capitalists typically raise funds every 3 years and invest out of those funds, and so they build portfolios. You can go to Crunchbase and look up any venture firm, and typically then, because it's actually every time we raise a new fund, we have to file a Form D with the SEC, and so each time it becomes public information, even if we don't make a formal press release announcement. And so if a venture firm's raised a new fund within the last year or two, definitely means they have capital to, quote, spend and invest. If it's been 3 years or so, they might be close to running out of money, so to speak. If it's been more than 3 or 4 years, then it's most likely they'll be taking meetings, but there's either very little money left, and so it means you might be the last one, so the bar is even that much higher, or they might just not have any capital at all. But VC will never tell you they don't have any capital.
Very good. That's helpful.
Yeah.
All right. Another question I just wanted to put out, and maybe Marjorie, you can start with this one. I have, a company has capital needs. How do they know if it's time to really, justify raising capital, or if it feels like it's too early?
I think the best thing to do, and all of you on this call are associated in some way with VMN, is to really be able to engage either a build mentor, invest mentor, someone within your network to find out and start the conversation with someone who's involved in the investment community, and they can give you the feedback to figure out when to do it. But again, it should be a regular. So let's say they're just like the Yale company I spoke about before, they realize they just aren't ready yet. They still want to get a lot of the data in place before they'll go out, but they want to keep having the conversation to find out when. And that's what they're doing, not only with me, but other potential investors.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, maybe Jen, you can jump in here, thinking about when, we talk a little bit about hitting milestones. So you go from pre-seed to seed, and when is the timing where you get to A, B, etc. Like how does one know those sorts of things? Jen.
So I think when you do fundraising and you're kind of bridging to the next step, the question is, you're bridging to where, right? And you have to understand that some startups are so desperate to just raise any kind of money, they just go out there. But I think it does a disservice. If you're saying we're at this stage and we're building a prototype and it takes this many months and this many dollars, and this is the reason why we're raising this much money, it makes logical sense, right? It's not like, oh, we need $100,000 to survive and eat ramen for the next 2 more months until we can come out with another $100,000, right? So that's a very bad way to raise money. You have to be thoughtful about that. And so once you get to that next step, it's okay, now we're at this prototype, we're trying to get to this a commercial kind of product, and we're trying to raise the Series A. Those are kind of thoughtful processes that you do. And I would recommend when you raise money, typically as a guideline, at least from my experience, raising at least 1 year's worth of runway, and ideally 18 months of runway is ideal, so that it gives you a buffer, saying you raise money for a few months, and it gives you that 1 year of kind of runway to kind of get to the next thing. If you raise too much money at once, I think it'll be also challenging, because you might actually leave other VCs, kind of push them out because maybe they don't write big enough check sizes. So you just have to be a little bit careful with that.
Yeah, that's really important. So you guys this has been such an interesting panel, and I'm really hopeful that our audience is walking away with some excellent nuggets about how to build their network of investors. I might just go to each of you to share any sort of final thoughts and advice before I turn it back over to Katie and Wendy. Marjorie, I'll start with you.
I think the one thought is do your research, become involved in organizations such as VMN, take advantage of all the opportunities with that. Also, in addition to connecting with investors, talk to other entrepreneurs as well, see what they've gone through, and you can really get a lot of nuggets of good information from them also.
Very well said, thank you. David, you're up next.
I'll repeat what I said before, which is that all investors make their decisions here. And so when you're fundraising, I think it's incumbent to tell a story. I mean, you want to tell the story of why you're doing this, why you're building it, and what the story of the company is going to be, and paint that favorite future of yours and what the world looks like when this startup is, thriving 5 or 10 years or 15 years from now. That's what gets everyone excited, whether it's individuals or venture capital firms or corporates.
Awesome. And finally, Jen.
Yeah, I think, sometimes it may feel that you're in a little bit of an inferior position talking to a VC or investor asking for money, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. And don't forget that, right? Because every single company, every single person has something to offer. And all VCs, angel investors, we all have something we need, right? It might be an introduction to an interesting company that you know of, right? Or they tell you that they're interested in this space, or they want to learn about something and you could tell them more about that. So having something to offer them, to kind of build that rapport early on. So when the time is right for you to ask for money and raising the money, then it's a much easier sell. And so start early, have something to offer. It might be just one introduction to somebody, right? Do you know this other angel investor? Do you know this other VC, wonderful guy, or this advisor that I have? He's amazing. Would you like to meet with him? Is sufficient, right? But have that, don't have the mentality that you're in a challenge situation. I can't tell you how many companies that I've invested in have almost died, literally with like weeks worth of cash, and now they're unicorn companies, right? Or they've exited with triple digit millions. So keep your head up and keep flying away.
Beautifully said. That's an excellent note to end on. Katie, I'm going to turn it back to you. We're right at 5:25, where I think we had hoped to be.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much, Jody. And thank you all who joined us today. So in the next 5 minutes, my wonderful colleague, Wendy Eaton, is going to set up our breakout rooms. And Marjorie and David, we're going to put you in a breakout room together. And Jody and Hyukjin, we're going to put you in a breakout room together. So there will be a VC and angel perspective in each breakout room. Participants, you'll have the opportunity to come in and out of breakout rooms. So if you want to talk to a couple of different panelists, you'll have the opportunity to do so. I think while we give Wendy a couple of minutes here, Jody, I might actually turn the last question that we just had and put it back to you. What would be kind of your takeaway for this audience today? Because you have very valuable insight as well. You see many, many ventures.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, these panelists were just so insightful. They were awesome. And so, I think a lot of what I see they've touched on, but it's really being prepared, knowing who you are and knowing who the investors are so that you can find that alignment. And this idea, David, you talked about how we investors do make decisions from our heart. We want to really like these founders and really believe in them. And this is what we do. We are so fired up to meet people who are creating things. This is it's just such an honor for me, I know, to work with founders. And I think I speak for the others on the panel that we're just delighted that you have these ideas, that you have the energy and the tenacity. So just really making sure that you are really using your ability to communicate very clearly what your mission is, what your goals are, and really who you are is critical to getting some folks to join your team, if you will.
Great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Jody. So while Wendy sets up the end of the breakout rooms right here, or I should say the beginning of the breakout rooms, one last question and one very general question I have from the audience, actually one of our mentors, Paul Grzuski. We have a question around how do entrepreneurs find investors who are really interested in their area? So I know that we've already mentioned Crunchbase, ACA, AngelList. Are there any other kind of industry specific lists or websites that any of you would suggest while we set up the breakout rooms here for just a couple more minutes?
I would mention, there are some really focused by industry incubators and accelerators. So for example, clean energy is one that I think about, that there are clean tech opens. There are things that really are going to attract the investors that like the stuff that you're doing. So if here in Boston, we have a great accelerator, Learn Launch, that deals with education technologies. So the more specific you can find, that's where you're going to be able to get in front of people, understand what you're trying to do.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Any other insights into this question in particular?
I think at the end of the day, with a lot of the VCs, partners typically end up focusing on a particular vertical, typically, or a few verticals. And what I would do, is if you're looking for VCs in a specific area or geographical, let's say in Boston, and you want to find that person who does fintech or blockchain or whatever it might be, right? You might want to follow some of them, on Twitter to see the tweets that they're doing, even, right? And looking through those, or look at some of the portfolio companies that they've invested in to find out what's interesting to them, because they will often broadcast what interests them. Even on the LinkedIn profiles, you can just look and see what companies have they invested in. And that's a nice way to kind of get an overall view of what the individual is focused on.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm now going to hand this virtual stage over to Wendy Eaton, who's going to put our panelists in their separate breakout rooms, and each of our participants can choose a breakout room to join shortly.
Thanks, Katie. So I'm going to make the breakout rooms go live now. They're titled Marjorie and David for that room, or Jody and Hyukjin for that room. So you can choose whichever room you like once they're live. If for some reason that option doesn't pop up to you, just type it in the chat and I can move you manually as well. So here we go.